times when I go in, I'm actually meeting with the attorneys from both sides. And we're sitting down and they're asking just basic fundamental questions about what is this, what is this technology, what is its capabilities, what can it do, how can it be abused, is it the abuse likely to have been intentional, or could it have been an involuntary abuse, which is an interesting phrase. But the idea of, could someone have accidentally released 40 million records into the environment, right? Could somebody have accidentally stolen everybody's Social Security numbers and let them go? I get questions like that, and they're very interesting questions to come back. And the other one component of that is, should the organization have been aware that this could happen? Which is always the big, from a legal standpoint, a big question for them. Should the organization have known? And that's a very difficult question to answer. Because you are talking in some cases about, there's an incompatibility here. You may have a company of 10 people, 10 or 11 people, that may have 40 million records that contain private data because of the project that they're working on as a sub to a different client or something. And so you go, well, that company should have had this level of security and they should be TI in terms of security. Well, they're not going to be with 10 people. And so if they sit there and go, well, we understand that, so we outsourced it all, then they'll come back and say, well, did you go in and evaluate all the things we talked about? Did you evaluate that outsource? Did you ensure that their employees had passed all these security tests? Did you do this? And in general, the answer is going to be no. So there is an issue there in terms of how that law is interpreted. And until we develop a better foundation of case law, I guess, till we get more case law in place, it's still very much well, how should we interpret it? And so you do get different interpretations based on which way you come from. And it's very interesting. It's fun to go sit down with the attorneys and talk, because I get some really interesting perspectives on how they twist it around. No, it's not fun it's not fun if you're the target, okay? Don't get me wrong. But it's interesting to see how someone, and I'm not talking about the guys who intentionally, twist something into something that's really weird. But I'm talking about legitimate questions of the legal implications or the legal intent behind how something happened. And it does make you pause and think a little bit about, well, is that a legitimate argument or not?
Yeah, I've learned, that's a good point, because I've learned a lot too by working with my legal team. Because you're right, it does force you to look at some of these decisions from a different point of view of, is this the right way to do it? Would a normal company, is this how it would normally be done, or are you outside the norm? So it forces you to ask those kinds of questions.
Right, and then of course the paranoia kicks in, and you go, okay, well then how do I fix this? How do I make sure this never happens again? That kind of thing. So, who had down here? Okay. I'm sorry. I saw somebody with a hand up. Does somebody have a question over here? You did? Okay.
I have two questions. The first one, I'm not sure if you can answer, so I have a second one ready. Could you give us, as much as you're able to share, maybe what the most sophisticated attack is that you've been involved in so far at TI, and what you were able to ascertain from who perpetrated that attack, what they were after, and maybe if they were all the way up to state sponsor level, or just some group that's well known that picked TI out for some reason. And then secondly, I want to take one of your earlier topics and look at it from a different perspective. You talked about your chips and what you do for your security. Being a chip manufacturing company, what's the risk that we have from foreign chip manufacturers putting chips into devices that might be sold and brought into America, as far as mingling in with your network or at home or other things? What potential threat could they provide there?
Okay, so I'll answer them in reverse order. So that is a concern, I know, from the U.S. government, from the standpoint of buying foreign-made components and software and things of that nature. So I think you have to be worried about it, but at some point, what can you do? If they're the only supplier or something. So can you do some vetting of that? Can you do some of your own testing? other than that, I don't know much else that you can do other than, some people do that initial vetting and then they figure my job is done. But again, monitoring the performance of that, whatever that component is over time, because some of these things will wake up and start heart beating out to the internet and stuff like that. So are you watching for that kind of thing? Do you have a good enough handle on your environment to know that's strange traffic, I haven't seen that before, or why is it doing that, is worth doing? And that's hard to do. It's not an easy thing to really map out your network and know what all the traffic signals are. But we do that the best we can. That's the best that we can do. From an attack standpoint, we see the full spectrum. I mean, I think at one point, I think we were blocking like 100 spam messages a second from coming into our environment, which I can't remember how many hundreds of millions that is per month. It's really crazy. But yeah, we've seen viruses that have gotten on our computers, and you pull that virus apart, and there in the comment line it says Texas Instruments. So that was written for us. And that's pretty scary to think that somebody's out there writing a virus just for TI. We've seen, and again, the way we've been able to catch some of these things is not necessarily when it came in, but again, the information that it was trying to send out, is what we were able to catch. Our users also reporting information. We've had people report weird behavior on their computer, and then you go and check it out and find, sure enough, something's been loaded on that system that shouldn't be there. So whether it's state-sponsored or corporate espionage from some other company, I don't know. In some cases, you really can't trace back to the original source of who sent that to us or who's trying to attack us. So we've had a real challenge with that. In some cases, we don't pursue it. It could be coming from a company or a country where TI says as long as we stop the attack and there's no monetary personal damage, then we're going to leave it at that.
And one of the things too, we're seeing more. Well, it's a combination of two things. One is everybody's gotten the email that somebody in Kenya has $50 million for you, and they just need you to give them all your information, and they'll send it to you, right? We all know about that in the email. We all get it. We all laugh about it. But understand that's still the #1 most effective email scam on the internet. They still gather more personal data on people using that one email. That's why you still see it, because it's effective, right? And then, so you have that end of the spectrum, and then you have the spectrum where we're talking about where you see code, malicious code that's written specifically for TI. Very sophisticated, very, very problematic. The other thing we're seeing is a combination of the two, where you may get a phishing email or something, but embedded in the email, especially if you have a BYOD environment, right? So it's embedded in the email, or it's embedded, so I get it on my iPad, I go, I click through or whatever I'm doing. And it's very innocuous. It doesn't do anything to my computer, so I go, oh, well, I dodged a bullet on that one. But the reality is that it's downloaded something to my computer that won't trigger until I connect to that network at TI, right? And then it'll do everything it can to get into the TI network. And that sophistication is very interesting. Right? And so that then leads to what Brian's talking about of you've got to have that security across the board. It can't just be in one place because you don't know what's going to activate it. You don't know what it's actually going to do once it's activated. You don't know if you clean it off, if it's, it's still sitting here. So, it can always go back on if it comes out again. So there's some really interesting, and interesting is not the word Brian would use. Brian would use hateful and spiteful and arrogant and driving me crazy. But for me, it's interesting because I'm a researcher. So it's a very interesting scenario for me to look at. And those type of multi-level attacks are the things we're starting to see. There was one, I think, down here. There you go.
Really a comment. The FBI recently in the North Texas area said that today their #1 function is to fight terrorism. In 2 years, it will be cyber terrorism. So it is really, really increasing, and especially the command and control type viruses you're talking about are becoming more prevalent, and they're state sponsored as well. So,
yeah, and there's a number of activities that are underway to address that from various standpoints. There's strategic, there's tactical, and there's operational issues now, which if you went back 2-3 years ago, it was 99% operational. We were chasing the viruses, we were trying to catch stuff. We're not going to win a war that way. And this really is a war that we're fighting. And so now we really are focusing more strategically and tactically on how we get ahead of these issues, how we put stuff in place, recognizing that you're not going to stop them from coming in, but you really want to catch them before they go out. That type of scenario of you know, I hate to use the word disaster, but continuity planning within your organization, not on I'm going to have an event that's going to be a hurricane or it's going to be a tornado, it's whatever, but that I'm going to have these events 100,000 times a day. And I need to be able to deal with them on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, building more resiliency into your environment. How can I, it's not the entire data center's gone, but, the supply chain's been disrupted. Can I roll back to an older version of the website, quickly and easily? Can I redirect somebody from, the TI website in Japan to the TI website in Taiwan because this was impacted? Right. We're seeing a lot of activity in that these days.
Getting back to your comment from previous about an email designed to, hit like one particular person or whatever, their iPad, et cetera, and knowing Brian's fondness for BYOD, I'm sure he's thought of this. You mentioned catching things when they leave the network. How do you catch things when they're leaving somebody else's device that they brought? Do you have executives register their devices and track their IPs, or what methodologies do you use to catch sensitive data that may be leaving through those devices?
Yeah, so we do have if you are bringing in your own device, we do have a registration process that we follow so that we can monitor that, as well as loading things like mobile device management software on it. And then the other thing is we're getting stricter about what data can go where. So there's just some data that we're not going to let go to an iPad. We're not going to let it go and be printed. It's going to stay in this virtual server farm or in this data center, or we may allow it to go from one data center to another data center across an encrypted tunnel, but that's it. We're not there yet. This is a journey that we're going on, but we're starting to recognize that you have to make a trade-off. If you want the productivity of this kind of mobile device, you can't do this function from it, right? The only way you can transfer money to pay, our long-term debt is through this server that we specifically hardened. And if you have to come into the office for that one function, that's your job, right? You're not going to be able to do that part of your job from, a Russian airport terminal, right? But what we're finding is, in the past, it was always all or nothing. I either let you have access or I didn't. But now, with the technology that's coming out, we're able to be more selective. So people actually are okay with that. After they, get done freaking out, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, if I can still get my email and I can still check my calendar, I can still play Sudoku, then I'm okay with that, and I'll do that one function when I'm in the office. So that's what we're trying to do.
One of the critical things on that, though, and I'll go back to something Brian brought up earlier, and that is the ability to categorize your data. It is amazing how many companies will spend millions of dollars to try to layer security on top of a mess of data. There's no other way to say it. A mess of data that has not been categorized at all. And so you've got website data in the same place that you have, operational data in the same place that you have accounting data. And it's not that they're, if you look at it, they'll go, well, physically they're on different servers, physically they're in different programs, and, we're good. But accessible through a single point. And that's where the problem lies. If I can use this and I can get access to my accounting data, my website, and my operational data, this becomes a huge vulnerability and needs to be managed correctly.
And where I see long-term, where I see it going, I mean, it's not there yet, but I could see a day coming where you can't even get access to that data. You know, that the environment will be smart enough to recognize if you're sitting at an airport terminal with an iPad, the system knows that and just shuts you off from certain parts of the network. But if you're sitting in your cubicle using a corporately owned laptop, it lets you access it. We're not there yet, but I think that the technology and the intelligence that's being built into routers and into next generation firewalls, you know, is coming. You know, that whole role-based access control and, you know, even geotagging and geolocation technology is getting to that point. You know, I've even heard of some people saying they may get to the point where they'll shut off cell phones if you're in a moving vehicle.
Yep.
So I think that's where we're headed long term. We're just not there yet.
Yeah. In the back here.
Yeah, I have a question about cloud technology. I think in your perspective, like how secure this technology is, because like just recently, well, when I'm creating a file, instead of the computer ask me which directory or which folders I want to save this file, there's actually the save it to iCloud.
Right.
That option pops out, and I think just from a user perspective, I want to hear from like your professional point of view, like how secure this or how mature this cloud technology it is, because just as the name it sounds, it's very unstable for the the user's point of view. Thank you.
So I think the technology that you're seeing in things like iCloud and Google Docs, it's getting more secure. You know, a lot of them now will use encrypted HTTPS, you know, secure channels to send the information back and forth. I think they do a good job of keeping, you know, hackers from trying to break into that server to steal your document. Again, I think where I get worried as a security professional is when you start reading some of the user agreements, they'll say things like way, way, way down in the agreement about how, and we might use your data aggregated to, you know, improve our services. So what they're really saying is, I'm going to read your stuff, and if I can use it for other things, I will. Okay, that makes me nervous from a security standpoint. So you got to pay attention to that. The other thing I worry about is.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay. So everybody in here reads every privacy and EULA agreement, right? And user license.
Or you click
read
next.
all those, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to make sure because sophisticated audience. So.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun some days. You know, that's 3 or 4 of these filled with coffee when you read some of them. But I think the other thing I worry about from that standpoint, and I think they're going to get better. I think privacy laws are going to drive them to not be able to do that type of end user agreement. But I worry about all the other stuff that, like I said, that goes with managing that data. Is it backed up? You know, can I get to it if I need to? What if I want to pull out of this agreement? I don't want to use them anymore. Are they going to give me all my stuff back in a timely manner? Did they delete all my copies of it if I end my agreement, or did they keep them? You know, if I want to know who accessed it in the last 24 hours, will they tell me? If there's a lawsuit and they're handing that data over to the FBI, are they going to tell me? It's all that stuff from a corporate thing that I worry about with cloud. I'm not so much worried about, you know, is it secure enough to put my document there?
Yeah. You have a question now?
Just real briefly, can you talk a little bit about two-factor authentication and how TI is using it?
So we're a late adopter to that technology. But what we are headed down looking at is using that, again, not just scattering it out across the environment and say we're going to use it everywhere, but we're looking at using it to access our most sensitive design data. So we are embarking on a pilot project to say, if you're going to access this type of data, you need another factor of authentication. And so we're in the pilot stages of that, and that should go live here by the end of the year to do that. But we don't use it everywhere across the board yet.
You got one over here.
Just very briefly,
Sure.
Can you discuss the potential uses of biometrics and, you know, from a security or IT perspective?
Sure. I don't know why that hasn't caught on as more. I mean, I don't know if you do or not, but
No, I mean,
there just doesn't seem to be a big, user acceptance of that technology. I don't know if people are afraid of their fingerprints or eye scans showing up somewhere. I just haven't seen it take off. Part of the challenge we have, incorporating it into our environment, again, you think about, we got 78 locations around the globe. I probably have 400,000 or 500,000 computer systems at TI. To go retrofit a fingerprint reader on all of those, you start adding it up the cost, and that's a lot of money, right? So until they become, built in to where it's just part of the iPhone or it's just part of the keypad, for a legacy company to go and roll that out globally is really a challenge. And then I also worry about, if you forget your password, I can reset it. If somebody steals your fingerprint, you can only reset it 9 times, right? So I think that's some of the fears. Now, whether that's a valid fear or not, I don't know, but I think that's some of it. I don't know. Does anybody else know about biometric?
Yeah. Apple just bought a company. It has both Android. Of course, I don't know what version of Android or how many different kinds of Android versions, and iOS biometric company. They're going to put it in the iOS